Happy New Year, everyone. Welcome to the first installment of Open Air for 2026, presented by the Harvey B. Gantt Center in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm Dexter Wimberly, and as always, I'm excited to introduce you to today's guest. Jason Woods, a.k.a. Flash Gordon Parks, is an ethnomusicologist living and working in Houston, Texas. He earned a BA in photography from Sam Houston State University in 2001. Since 2004, Woods has held several DJ residencies around the globe. He has lectured at institutions including Contemporary Arts Museum Houston, Rice University, the Art League Houston, among others. In 2019, Woods directed documentary Archie Bell, celebrating the achievements of soul music icon Mr. Tighten Up, Archie Bell. Our second guest, with his BFA in photography, Frank Stewart became a concert and on-set photographer, assisting and driving for the bands he photographed. In 1975, he joined the Studio Museum in Harlem as its first photographer in residence, teaching courses there. In 1982, he was invited to join the Kamawinge Workshop, a collective of Black artists documenting Black life. He received the National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship in 1984 and photographed that year's Los Angeles Summer Olympics. Since 1992, Stewart has served as lead photographer at Jazz at Lincoln Center. In 2023, his career retrospective, Frank Stewart's Nexus, was presented at the Phillips Collection in Washington, D.C. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming today's guest. How are you guys doing?
Doing great.
I'm doing fine. How you guys doing?
So normally, doing very well, very well. So normally with these conversations, it's one-on-one. So in order to, keep the flow going, and sometimes there's a delay, I'll just kind of ask you questions by name, and then we can just kind of keep it balanced. So obviously, I just read both of your biographies, and bios are kind of brief and don't really tell the whole story. But I'd love to give you, Jason, an opportunity to sort of share a little bit more about yourself and the work that you do, and then I'll have Frank do.
Awesome. So I currently am the chairman of the Houston Music Advisory Board. It's a opportunity for the music community here in Houston, Texas, to connect with city government and figure out a way that we can just basically expand the music community here in Houston. Houston has a rich music history. which for the past 20 years, I've devoted myself just basically becoming immersed in all of the different genres from different Houston musicians, you know, locally and of course internationally known. Just learning a lot about the offerings that Houston has given to music as a whole. A lot of surprising information and facts and connections, specifically Houston to Memphis pipeline that has been around since at least 1952. So, you know, that's the work that I currently do. Just basically trying to share Houston music, history, and culture with the world.
Thank you. Thank you. And Frank, I'd love for you to sort of do the same. Just give a little bit more context.
Well, I grew up in Memphis and Chicago, two blues towns. So I was in Memphis before the Civil Rights Act and grew up basically in apartheid, the Deep South apartheid. So I got to hear a lot of blues because of that. Uh, and I migrated to Chicago, and it was a
Thank
very
you.
good,
Thank you.
yes, very good jazz scene in
So
Chicago.
yeah, yeah. I mean, you mentioned Jason, for example. You mentioned the Houston Memphis pipeline, and then Frank, you mentioned Memphis and Chicago. I mean, these are places that have such deep, deep, rich musical histories, whether it's jazz or blues. Um, I want to ask each of you, like, how's that shaped your life? Let's start with you, Jason. I mean, obviously, you're a DJ, and you call yourself a ethnomusicologist, and I'm sure there are a lot of people that are wondering what is that. So maybe you
So,
can kind of give context to that.
absolutely. So, a good friend of mine by the name of Marlon Hall, we would often have conversations just about music. And I was just sharing with him, you know, these sort of, stories that I've heard just from interviewing different local musicians, you know, people that did session work or toured with a lot of bigger acts. And he said, "Man, dude, you're like an ethnomusicologist." And I was like, wow, you know what I mean? Like, so it wasn't something that I self appointed myself. He was telling me based on just the stuff that I had knowledge on was very eye opening in terms of how people relate music to culture, which is basically what an ethnomusicologist does. Studies the how music affects our day to day, you know, living. And I was just doing that naturally, just just being naturally inquisitive and wanting to know more about how these people lived and, not just the offerings that they had musically, but what type of human beings were they?
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And over to you, Frank. If I'm not mistaken, you photographed the 1963 March on Washington when you were 14 years old.
Yeah, my mother was married to Phineas Newborn Jr. You guys know who he is? Anybody?
Yeah,
I've heard of him.
yeah, yeah.
All right. So uh, that was my introduction to jazz, as a young boy. And Count Basie brought him to New York when I was like 8 years old, and I went with him. But I only stayed for like 3 years and went back to Memphis. But yeah, my mother, she was very politically oriented, and said there's gonna be a march tomorrow in D.C. and we're going. So I didn't have much choice. And she brought her camera, so she wasn't using it. So I said, "Well, let me try this. This looks interesting." So that was my first foray into image making.
Wow.
Thank you for sharing that. I mean, it's amazing how we just never know how these like moments, these moments in our life can be so pivotal and kind of really just kind of weave us into history in a way that I suppose we could have never just imagined doing it ourselves. Can you talk, Frank, a little bit about? And I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly. Is it Camoingi Workshop?
Camoinga, yeah, Camoinga.
Oh,
It's
can you tell me a little bit about?
the longest established black photography workshop. It was started in 1963, 62, 63 in New York. Roy DeCarava was the first president, and it's been going on ever since. I'm uh,
And
I'm kind of retired
please.
now from there, but it's still going on.
That's great. That's great. And I wasn't very familiar with it, and I was trying to do a little bit of research to kind of understand its sort of role in the histories that we're talking about. I want to come back to you in a moment because I do have some more questions about that. But back over to you, Jason. Can you talk a little bit about the documentary that you did on Archie Bell? Like, what inspired you to do that, and what was the process like pulling that together?
So before I did a documentary on Archie Bell, I did a documentary on DJ culture here in Houston, where I got a range of different DJs, different genres, but people that not only impacted the city, but had impact on the region and a lot of those labels at large, especially the radio DJs here locally. Houston was a space that broke a lot of records, that it was the midpoint, especially when you think about the chitlin circuit. So moving through, Houston was definitely a stop before you headed west. Um, so upon doing the Archie Bell documentary, Archie Bell is, of course, a legend, in soul music. Of course, locally, he's well respected. He's a son of Fifth Ward, which is a neighborhood here in Houston, Texas. And nobody had ever really told his story. So, I just took it upon myself to say, Archie Bell, living legend, he was still performing at the time. So I just thought it would be fitting, if we could get his story documented. And in 1968, him and a group called the TSU Tornadoes created a legendary song called "Tighten Up," and that was a huge hit around the world. It's been covered in many different languages. Still to this day, you can hear it in the airports, around the world. It's just a timeless track. And so, it just was befitting to get his story while he was still able to tell it.
That's such an
Didn't he have a
important thing to
brother?
do. Please go ahead,
Didn't he
Frank.
have a brother? Didn't he have a brother named Ricky Bell, who was a Heisman Trophy winner?
Yes, so his brother did play football, and most interestingly, I'll give you guys a fun fact. Um, there was a so mostly every single bell in music is related, and it's weird because it was due to a man, I forget his name, but he had like 17 children, and the
Wow.
Bell name. So Archie Bell is related to Tom Bell from Philadelphia. That was a songwriter with Gamble and Huff. Ricky Bell from Bell Biv DeVoe. Daryl and Cool Bell from Cool in the Gang. Um, Betty Wright is also related to them some kind of way. There's another Al Bell from Stax Records is also in relation, and there's a couple others that I'm missing, but and I confirmed this with Archie. So not only was his brother a great football player, but he also has a connection and a lineage with almost every Bell that has been in music in the past century.
That's
Duke
incredible.
Ellington had a bass player that was named Bell too.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure like a lot of those Bells are related, except
That's amazing.
except Regina Bell.
Right, right.
Right, it's a different spelling.
Sure, sure. Frank, I have a question for you. So the Studio Museum, in Harlem, recently reopened, and there's been a lot of like reflection on the history of that institution. And so in doing some research on you, and obviously I mentioned this in your bio, you were the first photographer in residence at Studio Museum in Harlem in 1975.
Right.
Can you reflect on that a little bit? Like, what was that experience like? I mean, I was already born, but I was super young in New York in 1975. So, what was it like being the first photographer in residence at Studio Museum in Harlem at that time?
Well, it was trying to be an institution, and it felt like it was an institute. It felt like we were doing something historical. We had all the artists came through there. If you were trying to be an artist in America, you had to come through the black artists. You had to come to the Studio Museum. So I got to meet everybody. See their work, and I taught classes. So I taught a lot of photographers at the Studio Museum, and it was amazing experience.
Yeah, it makes me think of, and this is something you probably could relate to very well, Jason, as well. It makes me think of like, hip hop in the early 90s, in the sense that I'd imagine, kind of based on what you just said, Frank, if you were in New York City and you were a black artist in 1975, the circle was so tight that there any artist that we now will look on as being like incredibly famous, really important to the canon and to history, you might have ran into them at a party or a coffee shop or just walking down the street. And I had a similar experience, being from a different generation and kind of connected to hip hop culture. I had a similar experience being from New York City, and growing up in the 80s and 90s, where there was this period of time where you name the person, the performer, somehow I was always in the same room with them. It's just like, just the way it was. But Jason, when I think about those times for me, like late 80s, early 90s, I was really unfamiliar with the hip hop scene in any other parts of the country. I was in New York City, and you're kind of like in this bubble.
Sure.
And can you kind of go back, Jason, as far as you can, and kind of talk about hip hop culture in Houston? And I know you've lectured on this as far as like DJing, lectured on DJing and going to different universities. Can you talk a little bit about that history and why you think it's important to bring that into academic spaces?
Absolutely, because Houston was no different than other major cities. Once everybody heard Rapper's Delight, right? Rap was a thing that they could get with because that vibe was already in black culture, listening to soul music, disco, what have you. So the transition to rhyming over those beats was something that was very relatable. So Houston's early hip hop history, of course, starts with the DJ, just like it did in the South Bronx. And guys like Daryl Scott, who's a local legend here, was one of the guys to do some of the early park jams here. And this is pre-Rap a Lot, which
Right.
a lot of people's first introduction to Houston hip hop is through Rap a Lot Records. So
True.
Daryl Scott is a guy that's playing hip hop records in the park, connecting the community, bringing that, like, we had all of those elements that you would find in New York, Chicago, LA, or Seattle. Wherever hip hop took hold, it took hold the same way in Houston. But I will say, a part of our identity, or what we're sort of known for now, came a little bit later, because in the early days everybody's mimicking and trying to sound like New York.
Right.
But once you get into the late 80s into the early 90s, that's when our identity, like who we were, the way, the slang, the things we said, landmarks, places of note, started to infuse themselves in the music. And I would also say, the same way like New York was sampling the records that they were finding close to them, like, so you had a lot of jazz records because New York is a mecca for jazz. Um, Houston is sampling blues, gospel, the jazz that was created here locally, and the funk and R&B and that southern fried sound, because
Yeah.
we're accessing the records that are in the households, amongst the guys that were producing music, doing that sound. So that's why you hear this sort of indigenous sound to the city, because that's just sort of the heartbeat. But Houston is a very diverse city, and it has always been.
So there's so many things that's making me think about, but as I mentioned, like finding yourself in certain rooms. So Frank, you have this iconic photograph of Miles Davis, backstage. How did that happen?
Well, I grew up in Chicago too, and on the street that I lived, like two doors down, was Miles's sister. Her name was Dorothy, so she was like my aunt. So I got to meet him early, like when I was about 11 years old. So then he was coming back off of hiatus, uh, and he was at Avery Fisher Hall. So I was working for Ebony at the time, and
Mm.
they said, "Well, we want you to go and photograph him." So I went and photographed him. We see all of these photographers there, and in the end, he's in the green room. So he gets up on the piano stool, and and I see all these photographers with these flashes, and I didn't have a flash. So I took a photograph off of somebody else's flash, and that became the one.
You just mentioned Ebony, yeah.
Yeah.
So I grew up with stacks and stacks and stacks of Ebony and Jets in the house. Like it
Oh
was
yeah.
like
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh
like
yeah.
everywhere. What was it like, finding commercial work at that time as a black photographer? Like what did you find, like a lot of opportunities, or was it really difficult?
No, you had to do everything. I photographed art. I photographed dancers. I photographed musicians. I was a stringer for Ebony. When Monetta Sleep would go on vacation, I would sub for him. You know who Monetta Sleet is, right? He's the first one to get a Pulitzer Prize, first black, for his photograph of Coretta Scott King and the daughter at the funeral. So
Yeah.
I would take his place, and no, I did all kind of stuff. There was no job
And so,
too small or too large.
yeah, and it's good to hear that story, because I think for a lot of aspiring photographers today, there's this sense of maybe a little bit confusion, like what does it take to like actually build a career. But I think a lot of the skills that you had to acquire then are still the same skills people need today. You got to be tenacious, you got to have a point of view, you got to build relationships, you got to get up early, you got to stay up late. So
Oh
you
man,
know uh,
photographing music, yeah, that's all night, man, especially jazz music. Some of these clubs back in the day, it was nothing but a hang.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah, no, that's so true. It's so true. Now, obviously, the Olympics are very different than a jazz club, but in 1984, you photographed the LA Summer Olympics. So that's
Well,
an interesting time
there's
because
they got
yeah,
8 artists. They were artists instead of photographers.
okay,
So I went as an artist instead of just a journalist. So my thing was making art out of it, but it was so overwhelming. you know, it was just so much stuff. That it was hard to take pictures without it just
yeah,
being packed with everything.
yeah, yeah. I imagine so. I imagine so. So we have the pleasure of having some images that both of you have generously provided. So I want to get the slideshow going and start with Jason's work. And we'll just take a minute or two on each image, and you can share what you like just to give the audience some idea of what they're looking at.
Okay, cool. So right here is Archie Bell, and it's taken at the legendary Continental Club, which is on Main Street here in Houston. And for years, Archie Bell would perform. He would have a huge celebration in September for his birthday that he would perform. And this is one of the last times he was able to perform during his 75th birthday. Not too long after this, he ended up having a stroke, and he's not totally out. He's been able to rehab a little bit, but I don't think he'll ever be back to performing. So this photograph to me is super special because it's one of the last times that the city got to really enjoy Archie Bell as a performer.
Wow, incredible, incredible. Has this photograph been included in exhibitions over the years?
No, so this was taken by a good friend of mine named Marco Torres, who shoots for the Houston Chronicle, shoots for various publications, shoots a lot of great work around the city, and so um, it hasn't been really amplified the way it should because it's an amazing photograph.
Yeah, it really is great. Really is great. Thank you. Let's go to the next image.
Oh, okay. So this is a rare photo of Bubba Thomas, who passed away during during COVID around the pandemic time. But Bubba Thomas is a legendary jazz drummer here in Houston. Also an activist. He's one of the founders of a great newspaper back in the 70s called Voice of Hope. And they were also an organization that would, help kids through art, with music being a key component. Bubba Thomas also founded the Summer Jazz Workshop that used to, I think it still exists, but I think they've changed the name. But during his tenure as overseeing it, I mean, it had people like Kirk Whalum, people like Robert Glasper, Brian Michael Cox, a lot of luminaries that have come out of Houston. Chris Dave, who's an amazing drummer, used to play drums with Mint Condition and has played drums for so many classic records. In the modern drummer space. But Bubba Thomas was a prolific drummer that released what people would consider spiritual jazz, starting in 1970. All of his albums his first five albums have been reissued by Now Again Records, which is ran by Ethan Allipat, who used to be in connection with Stone's Throw Records, if you're familiar with those guys. And I had the pleasure of helping write the liner notes for the reissue records, along with Lance Scott Walker, who's an amazing author um, from Houston as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's go to the next image. I also want to ask you about the name Flash Gordon Parks. Where did that name come from?
So yeah, so that name was given to me by a good friend of mine. This photo is me and Bubba Thomas at a listening session, just kind of talking about his work early in 2012. But the name Flash Gordon Parks was given to me by a good friend of mine named Savvy, who's an MC here in Houston, and he gave me the name because in the early 2000s, like every time you would see me, I had my camera with me. Frank, you know what that's like. So I would just be out
Yeah.
documenting, the shows, the scene. And so at the time he was working on music, him and another friend of mine named Equality, and they had a group together, a duo. They went by Black Embassy before they created.
Mm,
I mean, they still make music to this day, and they're really close friends of mine. But he gave me the name Flash Gordon Parks. It was sort of just a great play. Because Gordon Parks, of course, legendary photographer, but the Flash Gordon element, not simply because of the comic book character, but because of the flash of the camera.
sure.
I always had my camera going off. So, just a perfect name. And at that time, I was kind of juggling like photographing, mainly documenting. I always looked at myself as a documentarian. So the photographs I was taking was merely to preserve culture, and at the same time I was DJing. So, it's just a perfect stage name to run with, and I'm grateful for it.
Thank you for sharing that. That's like really, really touching background on that as well. Great name. Let's go
Thanks.
to the next image.
Okay, so this is an image of a group called the Masters of Soul. And this would be, from everybody that I've spoken with that was able to see them perform back in the 60s, they were our version of the Temptations.
Mm.
And in the center is songwriter, producer, composer Fred Kibble, who is a very prolific songwriter here locally. He wrote a lot of songs for other artists, along with almost everything the Masters of Soul recorded. And the gentleman on the very left of this photo is Eddie Webb. And at the time that I was doing my research heavy, there were only two members still alive, and I had an opportunity to talk with Mr. Webb and like clear up some things that were kind of uncertain about the group, that were kind of folklore among the record collector community here. And so I got to ask him firsthand a lot of great questions that he was able to kind of you know put the stamp of approval and let us know exactly what it was like recording back in the 60s. They recorded a lot of different singles. um, some of They were able to get a record on Capitol Records, which was huge back in the '60s for a band out of Houston. But they also recorded a few songs on Duke Records, which was ran by the legendary Don Roby, which is how you get that Houston to Memphis connection I mentioned earlier.
That's really insightful, and it's always interesting when I have these conversations with people from different parts of the country because there's all these parallel realities that are happening. You mentioned like your version, your city's version of the Temptations, and I just think how today we kind of take for granted that we're able to have access to so much different information simultaneously, but in a way,
Yeah.
it's like I grew up at a time where like there were these different worlds that were kind of happening simultaneously, but somehow interconnected and separate at the same time. It's very fascinating. So Frank, we have several images that you've shared as well. I'd love to get to that. We're at the halfway mark here. As always, it always goes by too quickly. So let's jump to the first image.
All right, this is Easter Sunday. Everybody knows about Easter. You get your new suit, your new hat, your new shoes, and you go to church. So I knew these sisters were going to be somewhere in Harlem with their Easter hats on. So I parked outside of a black church, and sure enough, after the service, they came out, lined up right in front of me, and I took the picture. And there was some burned out
1976.
buildings across the street, so it's like decay and what's coming next.
Yeah, yeah. As rough as it was in New York in the late '70s, it still was a sort of a magical time too. It's a very interesting juxtaposition. I always think about that, and I'm glad you created these images. It really does capture the beauty of that time. Let's go to the next image.
So I'm on the streets in New York. I'm taking pictures. I got a big 4x5 like press camera, and I'm trying to shoot it like a 35 millimeter. And I'm standing on the corner on 4th Street and Sixth Avenue, where they play basketball. And
Sure.
this cat, his name was TC. He just gotten out of jail, and he was selling trinkets, on the street. He had a blanket, and he had all these little trinkets that he was selling. So we got to talking. I befriended him, and he told me he just got out of jail, and he had a gunshot wound, and he wanted me to see it. So yeah, man, let me see that. So he turned his back and said, and I told him, let me take that picture, bro. So I'm getting ready to take the picture. And he said, wait a minute, let me put my medal around on my back because I only have God to watch my back. And I was like, ooh, you know, that summed it
Yeah,
up for me.
yeah, that's powerful. That's powerful.
I only
Let's go
have
to the
God.
next image.
So this is in Memphis, and this is a barbecue place. I did a book on barbecue, and this was one of the places that I featured in the book. It was called Hawkins Bar and Grill, and this was like at 2 or 3 in the morning, and this is his last drag on his cigarette, and you got people in the back, and he's laying the red hot game down, and they getting ready to go do something, get in some kind of
Yeah,
trouble.
this is it's such a cinematic image. If you had told me that this was a still from a film, I believe you. It's so real, but also like
Well,
so dramatic.
it's also musical. When you went to one of these joints, they had every one of them had a jukebox. And this one played nothing but the blues. So Howlin' Wolf was
Yeah.
on, and
Ah,
you know, in fact, it was Smokestack Lightning, and that's what we named the book, Smokestack Lightning.
that's a good song. That's a famous song.
That's a famous,
Yeah,
famous song.
let's go to the next image.
This is Jazz and Lincoln Center Orchestra on the road, and this is in Italy, in Modena, Italy. So they would play these halls, these opera halls, and the people liked the music so much they would have to come out 4, 5, 6 times to do an encore. So this was like the seventh encore that they did. And I said, well, let me go out and get this picture. So I got in back of them and took this picture as they
Beautiful,
were
beautiful.
bowing. Yeah. And that's
From a tech,
Modena, Italy. Modena,
so from
Italy.
a technical standpoint, what were you using to shoot this? I'm just curious.
Well, I was shooting with Leica cameras. I was sponsored by Leica for a lot of years. And this is a 28 millimeter, 35 millimeter camera.
That's an incredible image. Incredible image. Let's go to the next.
This is a mass baptism in Harlem. And you could come up there and get baptized if you were lucky enough to be around that time. This is Daddy Grace's church. You know about Daddy Grace, Father Divine, these guys from back in the
Hmm.
40s. Never heard of them?
No,
Well,
no.
you could come here, and this is the Harlem trombone choir, and I called this God's Trombones. And what they would do was open up a fire hose, and they would spray the people, and there would be a reverend there to bless the water. You could get baptized again every year if you were so inclined.
Wow, wow. That's
But this could
amazing.
be anywhere. This could be Africa. This could be,
Yeah,
anywhere. But it
yeah.
was in Harlem.
That's one of the things I was thinking about. It's if you take this photo sort of just on face value, you ask me, the geography, I wouldn't be able to tell you.
Africa, yeah,
Just
Harlem, the South, somewhere in this. It could be anywhere.
yeah, yeah, incredible. I think we have two more images from your presentation. Let's go to the next.
So this is Africa. I went to Africa a lot because growing up in the South, we didn't have a history, and I always wanted to know where this culture was so vibrant when I was coming up. The food, the dance, the language, the songs, everything, music. So I always wanted to go to Africa to see where these polyrhythms came from. So this is on Goree Island in Senegal, and this is the in back of the slave castle. And he was an artist making little paintings for tourists. But it harkens back to the black men and how strong they were to come over the Middle Passage and be in America and be slaves for X amount of years picking cotton. You ever pick cotton? It's whew, I didn't pick cotton. I chopped cotton though, and that was bad enough. So this is
Yeah,
talking about black man's strength and his back.
yeah, beautiful, beautiful image. I think there's
Another
the
one.
final image after this. We'll get to that, and then I have a few more questions for both of you.
This is the great Ahmed Jamal, who took me on the road in 1975 for 2 years. I was his road manager for 2 years. I was a boy when he took me on the road. I was a man when I got off the road. I was with these seasoned pros, on the road. And he was such a beautiful cat and a genius. So he just passed 2 years ago, and I got to speak at his memorial.
Well, you've interacted with a lot of incredible people. I mean, you're an incredible artist in your own right, but you've also interacted with a lot of incredible artists, including Romeo Bearden, right?
Oh yeah,
You know,
I was his photographer for the last
talk,
13 years of his life.
yeah, talk a little bit about his influence on you, if at all. I'd love to just hear a little bit about that.
Well, he wasn't really teaching me, but I got so much by osmosis, because he was painting and I'm taking pictures. So I guess he thought I knew something, or I already knew what he was going to teach me. I didn't know anything, and I just got so much from him, just watching him work and how he broke up space. So he would talk to me about that. That would be our language.
And so I think that's the final image. And so if I'm correct, I have a question for you, Jason. And that is, oh,
No,
sorry, there is one more. My
this is the
apologies.
final
There
one.
is one more.
So I got into photographing the devastation of climate change and how it impacting African American culture. So this is in the lower Ninth Ward after Katrina in New Orleans, and the lower Ninth Ward was all black, and it was basically where the culture came from. So there were like over 100 churches in the lower Ninth Ward before Katrina. There's 11 now. Only 11 came back. So I'm trying to talk about the devastation here and how the music died, and this represents a graveyard when you first look at it, but it's a Hammond B
Hmm.
organ, and yeah.
Hmm. Wow. Wow. Such a strong image. Yeah, I always think about New Orleans, and I have a lot of friends that are from there, and I didn't manage to visit before Katrina, which I always regret. It's like one of those things where you're not seeing a city the way you would be seeing it. It's like that New Orleans, and again, I don't want to speak out of term because I'm no expert on New Orleans, but I just feel like the New Orleans of the 90s, in the early 2000s, like after Katrina in 2005, if you didn't have that experience, you're never going to have that experience.
Right, yeah, half the population left, and most of the black folks, like in the ninth wards and lower ninth wards, it was just a ghost town. But a lot
Yeah.
of them went to Houston.
Yeah, definitely.
A lot of them went to
Yeah,
Houston.
absolutely.
So, so,
You
so speaking
you
of
get
Houston and speaking of influences, Jason, I'd love for you to tell me a little bit more about like your influences, not just musically and photographically, but what are some of the other things that have like shaped you as an artist?
Oh man, so many things. I mean, you know, Houston has a lot of different nicknames, right? We're the Bayou City, we're Clutch City, but we're also Space City. And Space City doesn't necessarily always connect to NASA, which a lot of people think because NASA is up the way. But Space City, this is a spacious place. Like you can have land, you can have this sort of a lot of Houston culture is slow in terms of our movement, but not necessarily slow the way we think and process. And so I think in a space city, it allows us to really absorb things, like really take it in, really, And when you're dealing with, music, art, fine art, writing, books or literature, if you will, um, uh, I think Houston has been able to give me a well-rounded sense of creativity. A lot of great, just creatives. People that I've just met along my journey. Whether they, I'll give you an example. There was a guy who was respected here in the city as Flower Man, and basically he turned his house into this museum of found objects, and he was doing it naturally because he felt a need to just repurpose things that he would find. And over the years his house started to stand out from other houses in the neighborhood. Then all of the art critics and people that loved art started to pay more attention to him, and he was just a celebrated figure in the community of Third Ward, which is a neighborhood here in Houston. And when he lost his home due to a fire, the people rallied together to get him a new home. And he did the same thing. He started collecting things and turning that new space into another physical art piece that you could check out. So that's just one example of the sort of inspirations that this city has given me, just watching people live in their true essence and be creative and finding a way to do art on their own terms. And, I always keep that with me. There's several examples of that here in Houston.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. So both of you are still, very, very active in the work that you do. I want to talk a little bit about the Jazz Greats exhibition at the Harvey B. Gantt Center and your connection to that exhibition. Maybe we'll start with you, Frank.
I didn't know anything about it. I don't think I'm in it, Emma. They never
Well,
told me about it.
there's a show. There's a show on view at the Gantt Center. Classic photographs from Bank of America's collection. A lot of incredible photos of jazz greats. Everyone from Dizzy
Who,
Gillespie, Ella
whose collection?
Fitzgerald. Bank of America's collection.
Oh, Bank of America. Okay, okay,
Yeah,
okay.
and so one of the reason I bring it up is that I think that there's Miles Davis and Count Basie in the collection, but the reason I bring it up is because I'm just thinking, like, what are the opportunities that you guys are finding to have your work seen in institutions today? Like, what is that looking like for you?
So for me, my connection to the Jazz Great exhibition was I put together a mix of music to accompany the works, the photographs. Um, so I basically was able to see some of the images, like Miles Davis and Count Basie, and just kind of curate a nice tight song playlist, but I actually mixed it, as a DJ would, so it flows and it's not just, a list of songs. But that's my connection to the Jazz Great exhibition that's currently on view.
So thank you. We spent a lot of time talking about history and all of the things that you guys have experienced over the years. But let's take a moment to talk about the future. Like, what are you working on now? What are you looking forward to? What's in the works that you're able to talk about? Or is there a project that you've yet to do that you really would love to do?
Uh, so for me, my focus is creating a Houston music museum of some sort, allowing the public to just sort of learn a lot more about Houston's contribution to music as a whole. Um, over the last 25 years, I've been collecting different artifacts, of course, through vinyl records, but other ephemera, posters, flyers, just anything, anything I could get my hands on. Frank, it's funny you showed that photograph of Ahmad Jamal. I recently found a 1991 flyer when he played a local club here in the city that he autographed. So just
Hmm.
uncovering things like that that are Houston related, and figuring out a space where they could be appreciated for years to come.
That's a great ambition and really needed. There's so many physical objects that we're losing, because everything, obviously, because of technology, has kind of shifted to being digital. But there's nothing quite like holding something in your hand that's 50 years old, 60 years old. You get an entirely different relationship when you pick up, for example, as you mentioned, a flyer from, 35, 40 years ago. It's a different feeling, because it kind of
Right,
transports you. I believe that there's energy in these things, and I think when you pick up an old album that was, I have some old records in my house too, that was, pressed in like 1965, and you pick up this record and it's an original, you get transported. I believe, like, you get
absolutely.
transported in a vibe that you're just not going to get from Spotify. It's just not gonna it's not gonna
Right,
do it for you.
right.
So Frank, what are you working on these days?
Well, after Katrina, I saw how climate change was just devastating the earth, and I'm starting to photograph the aftermath of stuff like that. Did a whole thing on the aftermath of those wildfires in California and Washington, Oregon, and I go back, to see what's happening. I was in the middle of like 300,000 acres of burned out forest, and
That's
I mean, it's it's incredible. It's just incredible. So I'm trying to show those things and how we need to change, else we're going to get changed. Because that photograph of the Hammond B I took like 3 years after Katrina, because there was nobody there to do anything about the church. So that's probably still there, just as it is now, because there's nobody to come back.
interesting shift. So, and maybe it's not a shift at all. Maybe it's something you've always been interested in. But from the photographs that we saw into this idea of like focusing on the environment, like what's driving that? What's motivating you to go in that direction?
Well, I think we have to talk about that. That needs. People are denying it, and it's definitely here. I mean, I grew up in Chicago, and it was so cold. We had to walk backwards to school. It's not as cold now. New
Yeah,
York, so you could ice skate on the lake out there. You can't ice skate on no lakes now. So it's definitely getting warmer.
yeah. Well, I think you didn't necessarily use this term, but I think that it does connect to the work you're describing, and it's sort of, especially around Katrina as an example. This whole idea of environmental justice.
Yeah,
There's certainly no coincidence that a lot of really historically important neighborhoods and cities that get devastated by climate change, if they had a predominantly black population, after they are quote unquote rebuilt, the population changes drastically.
right.
And so I think it's like a combination of documenting the world as it is right now, but also reminding people that it's fleeting and things do change. Um, and, and like, for Memphis, seen
Breaking up,
in the
breaking up. Minor technical difficulty. Please stand
Okay, I'm back. I don't know what happened, but as I was mentioning about technology, there you go. Can you guys hear me okay?
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so we're down to the final few minutes. Thanks for everyone that stuck with us through the little technical difficulty there. My apologies. So Jason, I was asking you about changes in Houston and sort of how the city has changed in the past couple of decades, for better or worse, in your opinion.
The city has grown tremendously. I'm not sure where we are in population in terms of have we bumped Chicago out, to be the third largest at this point. But I can honestly say it is a great time to be a Houstonian, especially a native Houstonian, because the evolution that the city has gone through. This summer we'll be getting the World Cup, so it's just you really see the amount of diversity that's really here, organically in the city. There's parts of the city that used to be very segregated, but now it's more inclusionary, especially that's interesting with gentrification going on, But it just shows that there is hope for a lot of things, to potentially happen. Um, you know, in the future. So I'm optimistic, for my city and how we can evolve. That's a lot of what I'm doing as a chairman of the Houston Music Advisory Board is figuring out how the music component can help serve and be an offering to the community in the way that we need it, especially in these times where there's so much turbulence in politics and race relations and all of those things. Music is one of the things that connects us, and if we're honest, music is has been a bridge, and here we are with hip hop being the ultimate bridge, because now not only is it a connector for race, but it's also intergenerational connections. Like grandmothers and grandchildren can enjoy the same genre of music finally.
Thank you for sharing that. And Frank, where are you located right now, Frank?
I'm in New York. Well, I'm in New Rochelle, right outside the Bronx. So I'm
Yeah,
still in
yeah.
New York.
And so, and I guess same for you. I don't know how long you've lived where you are, but there's so much change going on in America, different parts of the country.
All right.
What's
Hey, we could do another hour just on that in New York, how it has changed since the '60s.
yeah, yeah.
I was just at a conference on jazz, on new jazz, out jazz, avant-garde jazz that came into vogue late '50s, early '60s, up until now. So yeah, a lot of change.
Do you still go see live performances?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm still connected to Jazz at Lincoln Center, and we have a jazz club that's operational every night. When there's somebody I want to see, I go see them. You know,
What's the last great show you saw? That's my final question.
New Year's, it was Carlos Enriquez, the bass player for the orchestra, and it was Latin jazz. It was great, great stuff.
That's wonderful. Well, listen, Frank and Jason, I really enjoyed this conversation. I don't know if you know,
Thanks for having
but I'm
us.
on the other side of the world. I'm in Japan. You guys in two other cities, so it's really great that we're able to have this conversation from such great distances from one another. And I look forward to learning more about what you're doing and following you guys and perhaps meeting you in person one of these days. So again, I want to thank you. Thank the Gantt Center for organizing this first 2026 open air. So with that, I'll be giving my final remarks. I want to wish you both a wonderful, wonderful day, and thank you so much for your generosity.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. So the Gantt Center's goal is always to provide programs that inform and inspire. The support of viewers like you allows the Gantt to reach its its goals and to further develop programs like Open Air. You can lend your support to the Gantt Center by visiting ganttcenter.org/donate. Always be sure to like and subscribe to this channel for future programs and other video content updates. I want to thank you all for joining us for another great conversation, and we're looking forward to the rest of 2026. Everyone have a safe and wonderful evening. Good night.